Welcome back, Venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we have the honor to welcome a shining, glowing, what could even say, radiant VN fan and a fellow YouTuber, Radiant Wave. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, it's great to be here. I am Radiant Wave, and I guess you could say I am a relatively new visual novel YouTuber on the scene. Been trying to do a variety of different kinds of content when it comes to visual novels.
Very cool. Very glad to have you here, Wave. And I wanted to start things off by asking what your origins were as a YouTuber and a content creator. What decided to get you involved into making videos on YouTube in the first place?
Now, I guess my channel is a little bit unique in the way that I guess you could say I have two different starts for my channel. If you go really far back, you'll see that I initially started with Pokemon Let's Play content, and then as of, I want to say, close to maybe a year ago, that was when I started delving into the visual novel space. I think in both of those cases, probably the biggest push factor for getting me into content creation is honestly just through my friends group, and just kind of being pushed to kind of create the content that I think is fun, but at the same time being able to hopefully have that fun kind of spread across to my friends that would want to watch it.
Oh, that's nice. So it kind of started out as a small, I guess, interwoven community with your friends, just doing something cool for them. And then at some point you decided to want to branch out into the wider YouTube sphere?
Yeah, I guess so. As I was doing visual novel content, did just a tier list. I almost want to say the main reason why I wanted to do a tier list video for visual novels was just because of the fact that for myself personally, I was kind of keeping tabs on how I would kind of rank the visual novels that I had read, but wanted to kind of share that opinion to a broader audience.
Because after all,
you should preach it more often. You had Necopara very high, so it's good taste.
Well, it's been a while since I've done that, so time might be coming for me to do a new iteration.
Because the best parts of tier lists, after all, are to show off how incredible your taste is and argue with all the haters.
Exactly.
There you go, exactly. So you mentioned before getting into visual novels, you originally had some Let's Plays about Pokemon and even some fan games or so. And, so I'm just gonna guess you're a Pokemon fan, or at least you were back in the day?
Yeah, I would say I was definitely a much bigger Pokemon fan back in the day, but even now, whenever a new game drops, I will go ahead and play it.
Oh, that's neat. And then when did you make the decision to kind of pivot more into the visual novel sphere? Because visual novels, they're a very different subject to discuss, to play, to showcase, rather than a video game, right?
I think, it is on my channel as well. I had played Doki Doki Literature Club when that was taking the world by storm. And from there, I guess went down the rabbit hole and started to read more visual novels. And I want to say probably the biggest turning point was around, during 2020 when we had the pandemic and a lot of people were in isolation for that couple of months. And that was when I read Clannad. So didn't have a whole lot of stuff to do throughout that time. So I did really get to just burn through all the hours of Clannad and be able to kind of realize that visual novels as a medium was something that I really did enjoy, and was able to kind of experience these fully complete stories throughout just one title, and you could sit down and experience everything. Another thing was that just reading visual novels, I find it to be a really nice kind of calming kind of way to where if you're at the end of the day, maybe you come home from work or from school, being able to sit down and read a visual novel for an hour or two before heading off to bed was something that was pretty like nice and relaxing for me personally.
There's definitely many visual novels that lean into that whole slice of life or fluffy aspect, the kind designed to be very relaxing. And it sounds like, those are your favorite types, but there's also plenty of visual novels that tie more into the thriller sides of things, or mystery or action too. I mean, do you have much familiarity with those, or do you just, want to stick with the stuff you like best?
No, to a certain extent, I like to think that I am willing to try a pretty good like variety of different visual novels. So, I mean, you do have stuff like, well, Higurashi, or what I did recently on my channel, going ahead and diving into Saya no Uta, despite myself personally not really being too big of like a horror fan, just to kind of experience it and see, like if I would enjoy it or not.
Yeah, same here. That's how you end up finding some incredible titles that you never expected you would have enjoyed. When you see like the synopsis or you see the plot and you think, well, that's not really my thing, but you give it a chance, and suddenly you have a new favorite. Speaking of favorites,
I want to go back to one thing that Wave mentioned, and I wonder how big of an allure VN had on you by this simple thing you mentioned, that you experience full stories. Because me personally, at some point during my anime journey, I started to get pissed off at animes never finishing the stories and always dropping on the second season or whatever. And VN's had that allure. I'm reading the product. It has a complete story from start to finish, even if it's not a single title, but rather a series, so volume 1, 2, and 3. Still, it's a complete story.
Well, yeah.
How much of that played a role?
I think it's a pretty good like amount of impact, because yeah, I'm in that same boat of like, okay, well, you watch an anime or something and oh no, they made that anime just so that way they can sell the original source material, and you're never going to get so and so. I found that it was really good to be able to have visual novels where there's a broad like range of, I would say, playtime that you could play. There's so many visual novels, you could sit down, you could read one that's 5 hours, or you could sit down and read one that's 80 hours. But regardless of that fact, that it was really nice to be able to know that for like a majority of visual novels that you could sit down and experience the full story and not really have to feel like you're missing out, I guess, in a way.
I also remember on some of your videos, you showcase Infinite Stratos VN, right? So that's one of the titles that is an anime. And pissed me off the fact that it doesn't have a conclusion. So
yes,
but I don't think a VN made from IP solved that problem, because it still has to somewhat maintain the status quo. And I found myself drifting away from VN adaptations and or continuation and trying new ones, like completely VN original works.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I mean, I've seen my own like fair share of anime adaptation, like visual novels that don't really feel like they hit on the same level of quality as you might see from something that's like a dedicated visual novel. But I will say, at least in the case of the Infinite Stratos VN, I kind of went in with that mentality and I came out feeling like it was pretty like satisfying, because at least for that one, it took like the second season of the anime and kind of used that as like the structure for how like the world and what like activities are happening for that visual novel, but at the same time created its own narrative that was within its own like bubble. So I guess if that makes sense, to where it's not like dangling the story of the anime and the continuation in front of you. It's more of tackling the story that was specifically made for the visual novel itself, and that ends up being wrapped up.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I wanted to specifically ask you about the Infinite Stratos, because that's the one title that anime I enjoyed, but still had a gripe of, oh my god, where this is going, where the next season, I want to see the story concluded somehow, even though the chances are very bleak, given it's more of a harem anime, right? Then again, Data Life was based on a light novel that has a conclusion, has an ending, and also has VN spin-offs. So maybe it can be done.
I want to also bring up the point about visual novels that are pretty much complete experiences, because you've actually talked a few times about, for example, gacha game stories, including Heaven Burns Red, for example. And what are your thoughts on those, about a story that's tied to episodic progression, sometimes involved with having certain characters, and it being a live service game, it may someday go under and it'll be completely lost. What are your thoughts about those?
It's like a different kind of, I guess, approach that you have to take when it comes to like getting into a gacha visual novel, because you kind of do need to understand that at any point you could end up missing out on that, like the full content of like the story. In some ways, I think it kind of has its own benefits and its own like negatives to it, to where, like I said, it's something that's not permanent. So even like, let's say if a gacha visual novel does end up concluding its story, at some point it is going to go away. So you're not going to be able to read it, like 5-10 years from now. But at the same time, I think there is like some benefits to it, especially if you do really enjoy that gacha game. It's able to, continuously provide more content over time that can really make you feel more attached to the like story as a whole, I want to say.
Okay. It's pretty funny because there are some games like Fate Grand Order, which has been really stretching out its second arc for just years now, especially in comparison to the time frame they had for their first arc. And so my gut reaction when you said how they can always add new content was like, oh no, I don't want them to keep dragging it out with more story chapters. But I mean, you are right. I'm not just meaning to argue with you. It's, you can have something good on your hands, and then the devs can just keep giving more and more of it to players who stick along for the ride. That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, for the people that enjoy it. I was thinking too myself, just recently ended up finishing Lost Belt 1 of FGO, so I'm still pretty far behind probably compared to a lot of people. But I feel like each individual like story is condensed enough to where it feels like its own like arc, and in some ways almost feels like its own visual novel by itself.
Fate Grand Order's Lost Belts are great examples of that. And boy, you've got a lot more to go through and a lot more peak incoming.
Too much.
Yeah, take your time.
As a dedicated gacha hater, I'll just chime in very slightly, because I have a sense of you both possibly enjoying those gacha games not because those are VN gachas, but rather despite them being gachas. But then again, I haven't been sucked into the gacha world of VN, so what do I know?
That's a fair point. I do think that the main story does have problems since this is in a gacha format. They need to keep introducing new characters and new environments and new enemies. It's always the chase for more new stuff. And in fact, Fate Grand Order is pretty good about reintroducing old characters into new story beats, so it never feels like people are getting too abandoned, but it's still the underlying problem that plagues a lot of other gacha games more. On the one hand, if we got something from Fate Grand Order and it had been like a visual novel, just a single complete package with all sorts of story mode condensed, I think it would be a vast improvement. On the other hand, we have gotten so many events out of Fate Grand, or like limited time events, seasonal holidays and whatnot, that have also provided so much content that you could never provide in a single standalone VN like that too. So I agree with you in some ways, but in some other ways I am still happy it's as a gacha though, MR. But oh man, I don't mean to derail this too much away from our awesome guest, Radiant Wave here. If we want to get this all back on track. So, about your YouTube channel.
No, you don't want to derail it. Back
how
on the train.
Yes, back on the train. Choo choo. How did you acquire your YouTubing skills in the first place? Like, were you taught in some way, or did you self-teach yourself how to do video creation?
I guess it would probably just be self-taught. I mean, I wouldn't even know if you'd want to say I'm skilled. If you watch a lot of my videos, I don't really do a whole lot of like editing wise. A lot of people kind of take my content and say that it is more old school, and kind of goes in fact with I don't spend too much time like as far as like writing scripts for my videos either. A lot of the time I kind of do just like go off the cuff and record my thoughts in the moment on whatever topic that I am talking about. So in a way, I guess it is just kind of watching enough YouTube and kind of like, I guess, imitating some things that you pick up. So I guess in a way you could say that I'm self-taught when it comes to my general approach to YouTube.
Honestly, that was actually the point that made me register you on my radar, because in that free spirit way, you are quite close how we approach our topics. For example, one topic I really liked that you made out of nowhere. Apparently, you really felt that way that day. You talked at length about home settings in VNs. And very rarely I see content creators approach concepts rather than titles, right? Because the most common, and not to disparage anybody from doing that, but most commonly, content creators focus on title being a review, analysis, an essay, the constructionism of a title. But you went ahead and said, no, but I like home because it feels homely. Like, wow, that's actually super chill approach to that topic. And it felt like I felt some camaraderie with you that, we also tend on the podcast just bring random topics that I felt that day and ask Tauros, please allow me to talk about this thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
To be fair, Wave has done a lot of more analytical types of videos. I've seen you have several that are reviews stylized around one specific VN. So, yes, you do have variety in your channel, but you still also focus on one title pretty often as well, right?
And what would that one title be?
There's been a few. Like, let's see. You just did one recently about Mizuhiro. Another review on Sayanouta. And I guess some of the more older ones, especially like Muff Love Unlimited, especially Air as well. So there's all sorts of individual titles, but I also do appreciate that you also have videos about different sorts of styles or aspects involved in visual novels, because that is a pretty big breadth of creativity in the VN content creation sphere, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm glad to hear you think that way. When I was starting to get into deciding, okay, well, I'm going to go for it and continue to make visual novel content for YouTube, I decided instead of focusing onto like one specific topic, especially since like I had figured if I was going to only do reviews, considering how long it takes to read like a certain visual novel, sometimes you might end up having like pretty long, like dry spots for when you're uploading. But also, like, I guess how I said, we're kind of taking inspiration from others, like YouTube channels that maybe I would watch, kind of being able to see, okay, well, I wanted to take visual novels as a medium and try to like kind of branch it out as far as I could and provide more types of like you were saying, variety content, and being able to kind of just talk about various different aspects, whether that be reviews, whether that be maybe like how we were saying, were like maybe just kind of the vibes of specific visual novels with the like the home setting visual video that I had made, and just being able to kind of create like a pretty like wide range of content around visual novels out of a medium.
Yep, that's true. There is indeed a wide variety you can make out of VNs. Speaking of, go for it, MR. Yeah,
I vividly remember the feeling I got when I saw Radiant Wave notification. It's a topic about varied depth of gameplay in visual novel, and I knew that is the time I need to start pestering Radiant Wave to join on the podcast, because oh god, another person talks about both pros and cons, how to do gameplay in VNs, whether or not they have a place or not, and how different people feel about it, including your own feelings on the matter. That was a funny moment.
Yeah, Wave. Speaking of this topic, how do you script your videos? There are some approaches where like they type out every word and content creators read from a script, and then other people who just hit record and they just go off stream of consciousness. So I was wondering what your approach was.
I would say I'm closer to that latter explanation, where I don't script my videos like in a normal sense. In some ways, when I have like a list of videos that I would like to record at some point, and for some of those videos, when I know I'm getting like wanting to record it, I'll write out like a list of maybe topics that I would want to discuss during that portion of where I'm going to record it. But a lot of the time while I am recording, it's just very off the cuff, just kind of going off of like, I guess, going with the flow and just going off of what I'm thinking at the time, and not really looking at any specific like script or, you know, whatever in front of me. I just kind of do my own thing.
Yeah, very freeform style. Yeah, that sounds very, I guess in some sense you could say it sounds very honest. It sounds like it's coming from your true thoughts and your emotions to how you feel about these topics or about these VNs. It's a very different style, and I mean, one that arguably makes less work for you as well, too, right?
Yeah, that's why I was saying in one ways, how I wonder, you know, how much you could say that like the quality of my videos is, because in like conjunction with how much like less of a workload I have when it comes to recording my videos, at the same time, if you look at my videos, I don't really like to do too much from the editing front. But one thing I had kind of considered maybe as like an excuse for my laziness, but at the same time, that like if we all enjoy reading visual novels, I kind of feel like, at least like especially in my review videos, I don't really go too deep into discussing like what the general plot of a visual novel is, because I feel in some way, if you're watching like the video footage that I have on screen, because it's more like longer scenes, like where you have like a couple minutes, you can really like digest and see kind of like the general vibe of how that visual novel is like plays out, without me having to really go ahead and explain it in too much detail.
So just the general, I don't want to say gameplay, but just the general typical scenes you see of a VN that's scrolling around in the background as you talk. Again, you feel those vibes kind of communicate the title well enough on its own?
I'd like to think so.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way.
That's actually a very interesting thought for the images that scroll in the background. And this is similar to how we also have those images scrolling in the background. And I sometimes fight with Tauros whether or not those should be one-off out of context pictures, or maybe there should be somewhat interconnected sequence of events that give a little bit more context to a situation playing out. So if I understood you correctly, you veer a little bit more into the camp of VN readers who will take the time to, at the very least, inspect the vibe of those pictures, if not read what is happening on the images in the background, right?
Yeah.
I think it's suitable. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, I would also circle back to one more thing you said. Because you said you tend to go off the cuff without much planning for your videos, but across the variety wave you did, you also doubled slightly into the tutorial area with your video about how to textractor and the untranslated VNs. You also ad-lib that and just go with the flow?
Yeah, it was a lot of that was just like live footage of me, you know, rolling around with the mouse and showing people live demonstration of, you know, how to go about using Textractor, and then also OCR reader for games that Textractor doesn't want to work with.
Unfortunately, those kinds of tech issues are always prevalent, huh?
Yeah, then,
although or go ahead.
I mean, I wanted just to add on that it shows the typical situation a user can run into, right? It's not scripted. It just happened. This is how Wave would try and or solve it. Yeah.
Now, I do have one burning question for you, Wave, that must be answered. Who?
And what would that be?
Yes, who is the character in your profile picture?
So the character that I decided to do my profile picture for is a character by the name of Sumi from probably my favorite visual novel in like the moment right now, currently, which is from Monobeno. And I kind of only really chose it, I want to say, at first because of the fact of that was coming off of, like, I guess coming off the waves of my first initial visual novel tier list, and I figured, you know, considering how like passionate I am about that visual novel in particular, I figured I would go ahead and make that the channel mascot.
Oh, nice. Why did you end up liking her or the title so much?
It kind of does go in with that, like the home setting video that I made, where I feel like Monobeno, it does a lot of different things. So I would say, like, even for people that kind of really enjoy the like action oriented side from like Type Moon games, Monobeno has a little bit of that as well. But I think in general, a lot of the visual novel does feel like it's very much, I guess, like cozy, homely, like vibe, where it takes there's like a lot of different characters throughout the visual novel, and there's a lot of time to be able to become acquainted with not only the characters that have designated routes, but for all the characters like in the supporting cast as well. So it was just something that I found myself really enjoying.
Speaking of that title, because if I understand correctly, that title isn't translated. So my question would be, what made you go for the Textractor route and try out those untranslated VNs? What was the initial spark? Because from my perspective, I dreaded the moment in which I have to hack my VNs to get enjoyment out of it, given how, and at least from my perspective, unreliable that translation can be. I don't want to spoil myself on the game by mistranslating the dialogue.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point to bring up. For me personally, I guess my like initial like spark for getting into untranslated visual novels was because of the fact that I had read the translated version of My Tetsu, which is from the same developer across both My Tetsu and Monobeno. So considering how easy it was to be able to access Monobeno, being a visual novel that was available on Steam, I decided I would go ahead and take the plunge, try it out with Textractor, and see if it was something that I would be able to like work with. I do kind of get the feeling of like how people would say that they would rather either not read it at all, or like go ahead and spend however long they want or however long they need learning an entirely new language, so that way they could like quote unquote further enjoy their like hobby. But at least for me, I feel like yes, Textractor and like other like programs that do that same kind of thing can be a bit unreliable. For me personally, I would like, especially since a lot of visual novels have voice acting as well, so you can still get what's going on, even if maybe the translation is not the most accurate. I would rather be able to read it in my own way through Textractor or whatever, as opposed to not reading that visual novel at all.
Oh, wow. And there's plenty of people on the flip side who would rather not read the VN at all instead of reading something that even maybe might have a chance of not being a good translation. And so, And I mean, I do have respect for both sides. I understand where they're coming from. I'm more in the camp of waiting at the very least for the future to see if we can ever get incredible improvements on MTL on that front, or just hoping every night before going to bed that someday my title that I've been looking at will get an official translation. Any day now.
Yep. 10 years later.
Yeah. Hey man, it happened with the Tight Moon VNs. We can hope.
Yep.
Yeah, although for some titles the copium tanks are dangerously empty.
Any day now.
Yeah.
Any day now. But yes, okay. Any last questions, I guess, Amar?
I mean, one question that comes to my mind. This is something I've seen on one of your videos, and I wonder, how do you reach that kind of decree when you say the best visual novel you'll never read? What makes you make those judgments, Wave?
I mean, I guess in some ways maybe that was early YouTube me trying to clickbait a title, but at the same time, I guess there is some truth to it. I mean, kind of going off of how I was saying, it's the visual novel you're never going to read because, you would have to learn Japanese, or at least that's what a lot of people believe, right? I feel like in some ways, at least for me and the content that I've been creating, at least for some of the untranslated visual novels, I feel like I would hope that maybe in some ways I've inspired some people to take that plunge and be able to dive into a visual novel that maybe they saw offhand and thought it looked cool, maybe something that looked exciting, emotional, and is really dejected over the fact that they wouldn't be able to read it. But I feel like, with something like Textractor, people made those tools for a reason, and it's just a matter of going ahead and using those tools and being able to finally be able to enjoy something that you otherwise were never going to be able to touch in the first place.
Oh, so this is somewhat of a challenge to a potential viewer that clicks on that somewhat clickbaity title for you to convince them, listen, you don't need to dread those tools that extract the text and translate it. Look at me, I've read Monobeno and I love it.
After all,
absolutely,
it's not clickbait, it's confidence. Speak your facts. Truth. Sing it from the rooftops. Yes. Then on that note, thank you so much for hanging out with us, Wave. This was really cool getting to showcase someone else who is also a YouTuber content creator in the big old world of visual novels. And I hope you enjoyed talking with us and talking to everyone here as well.
Yes, it's been an absolute pleasure being here on the podcast, being able to talk with you guys.
Yeah, I gotta say, it was great honor to finally have the opportunity to talk with you. And I also want to thank all our listeners. And with that, VNture out.
VNture out.
VNture out.